Hello and welcome to SciShow Talk Show, that day on SciShow where we talk to interesting people about interesting stuff. Today we're talking to Mark Hebblewhite, professor of wildlife biology at the University of Montana. I got a hat. Thanks.
Looks great on you, Hank.
I don't have a lot of camo hats, so now I have one.
Now you'll be able to hide in the office here. So, well, great to be here. I've followed you guys' show for a long time, and it's an honor to be here. So
yeah, thanks. It's great to finally have you because you're always traveling all over the place.
Seems so, yeah. I end up, a lot of my research is in Canada and in other parts of Montana here, even in Yellowstone, but also overseas a lot. I seem to work quite a bit in Asia and a little bit of time in Europe as well. So
nice.
Yeah.
So who do you study? It looks like we got a selection of things on the table here.
We do, and I brought really both parts of what I study, and really since I was 17, when I was sort of in a Hoods in the Woods type program, and I literally was in the wilds of Ontario and heard wolves howl for the first time. And so really since then, which is now a depressingly long time if I really stop and think about it, but over 20 years now, for a lot of my career, and now myself and my students study really predator-prey dynamics. So predators like large carnivores like grizzly bears, wolves, mountain lions here in Montana. Overseas, I've worked a little bit on tigers in the last 10 years, which is sort of about as cool as it gets for large carnivores on the planet. And yet, like a lot of people before me, if you want to understand what makes large carnivores do what they do, within minutes, you arrive wondering what their prey are doing, right? Because that's really what an animal like a tiger or a wolf spends most of its time thinking about, is where to get its next meal. And so if you want to conserve or study or manage large carnivores like wolves or tigers, you need to understand where their prey are. And really, the species I just talked about, their prey are large ungulate animals. So ungulates are, it's a fancy word for a hoofed animal, right? So things like deer, bighorn sheep, here in Montana, moose. Around the world, we have other species like roe deer, red deer. I study a lot of caribou lately. Caribou sort of occupies a lot of my time. And so it's really those kinds of dynamics. How do predators affect prey? And typically, that's a lot of what we spend time thinking about, especially in Montana, is that those are sometimes things that people don't like, right? So what wolves do to my cow, or what the effect of mountain lions are on my pet animals, say, or hunters worrying that wolves might compete with them for their prey. But really, it's also the other way around, right? That we often forget that wolves are what they are and elk are what they are because they've spent tens of thousands and millions of years trying to kill each other every day. And so, they've both evolved to be the animals they are because of that process, predation. So I'm very interested in my students and I on all aspects of predation, predator-prey dynamics of these kinds of large animals.
So you have any active research right now?
Yeah, no, we have the longest running elk project in North America. So it's now year 19 of radio-collared marked adult female elk. So we've studied individuals now since they were born to when they die of old age. And to study elk, then we need to study wolves. So we've had elk and wolves radio-collared in Banff National Park. So that's where I've worked for about 25 years. I also work with the Yellowstone Wolf Project. And then, as I said, we've got lots of projects on caribou. And now, unfortunately, there's not many caribou left in the U.S., and so I end up having to travel a lot and work in Alaska and Northwest Territories on caribou.
Are there any caribou in the lower 48?
It's a very good question. So,
I did not know that there ever were.
Well, so, if we look at the front of the office here, you guys' studio, we can see Lolo Peak.
Yeah.
In the 30s, there was up to 12 caribou living in Lolo Pass.
12 of them.
Yeah. And so
that's not a ton.
That's the 1830s, right? So this is like 100, 150 years ago. Caribou used to occur as far south as Stanley, Idaho.
Wow. Okay.
And so recently, though, last winter, the only remaining caribou also occurred in Minnesota and Maine, upstate New York even, places like that. And they've all declined. Caribou are declining across North America, and in fact, almost the world, from a variety of reasons. But here in Montana, there was caribou in northwest Montana. Again, decades ago, like we're talking in lifetimes, there was caribou. And last winter, the last caribou population that comes into northern Idaho, northern Washington, had declined from 12 to 3 females. No more males in the population, and none of those 3 females were pregnant. So we're calling that extirpation. That's the end of that caribou population. And it's about the 4th caribou population I've been involved with or studied that has become extinct. So we're losing caribou. A lot of what I do is studying endangered species, and we often think, well, things like tigers are endangered. But here in the U.S., we're in the process of losing a species in the lower 48.
I didn't even know they would naturally occur here.
Yep.
So we have on the table, this is an elk antler.
Indeed. Yep.
That gives you an idea of the size of an elk.
Yep.
And also the size of the antler of an elk. Gives me a pretty good idea of the size of an elk antler. That's terrifying. Is that a sexual display? Is that for like competition with other males, or is that for protection?
Yeah, no, good question. And that's the subject of some research that a PhD student of mine has just done. His name's Matt Metz, and he's worked in Yellowstone. And again, one of the most compelling things about large ungulates is indeed these ridiculous things they wear in their heads.
So ridiculous. That I could just grow a giant bone out of your head every year.
And do it every year, right?
Yeah.
And then throw it away, and then start over again. And again, ungulates have two types broadly, right? They have antlers that grow every year.
Mm-hmm.
We call them deciduous, like a leaf, right? I mean, although it's a little heavier than a leaf. Or horns, right? So like a bighorn sheep that grows incrementally. Now, there's pronghorn antelope that are somewhere in between, but they're basically a horn too. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, since the dawn of time, if you look at the very first cave paintings of people, they're of antlered ungulates, right? And usually 30,000 years ago, our main interaction with the antlered ungulates was to eat them. But then very quickly, they figured heavily in adornment and sort of decorations in sort of traditional societies. But from the ungulate viewpoint, there's really only the primary function of that ridiculous thing on your head is breeding.
Look healthy.
Yeah, it's like the Hummer driving up and down Main Street on a Friday night, right? They're trying to advertise that they have such a ridiculous abundance of resources that they can invest in these ridiculous things on their head. And now we see in species that scientists call polygynous. What does that mean? That means instead of humans, we like to think of as monogamous, which of course isn't always true. But most of the time, humans are. A polygynous species like elk means that one adult male might successfully breed with 20 or 30 females, and thus that means that the other 29 males don't get to breed. And so when you have a breeding system that's like that, that gives huge incentives to the winner, right? So the losers basically die and don't contribute to the next gene pool, next generation in sort of evolutionary sense. And so that sort of strong pressure leads to what we call sexual selection. So sexual selection means that when species are competing for reproductive opportunities, that can actually lead to really quick kind of runaway evolution that creates these giant structures on their heads. And so,
but it seems to me that like eventually, like then you have 30 calves that get born, 15 of them are male, and they're going to be the biggest antlered ones. But what if there's like a year of want? And so suddenly you have all of these successful, like all the genes of these male elk are saying like, you're going to grow the biggest antler, but it's like, but also like, what if there's not enough food?
Your question covers two things. Really, it's whoever's the largest, animal usually does the breeding. So it doesn't matter absolutely if you're the largest, just if relatively you're the largest, right? So even in that sort of, severe winter when everybody's in worse body condition, there's still going to be somebody who's bigger. But the second point is exactly why antlers differ from horns in some ways, because antlers are kind of like real-time advertising.
Right.
Like, here's my body condition today because of what I did in the last year. Whereas a horn is kind of like an incremental accrual of advertising. And so if you flip it around from the female's viewpoint, they're interested in assessing males of quality that have what it takes to survive and thrive and get resources, right? And so the females are the actual ones doing the choosing. The male ungulates think they're doing the choosing, but they're just walking around with a billboard saying, please pick me. And so what we started noticing though, and again, it was really my colleague and PhD student Matt in Yellowstone on the Yellowstone Wolf Project is we started wondering if there was a secondary function of antlers. And the primary function, yes, is breeding, and we know that. But there's something very special about elk antlers. So if we think of, the other antlered ungulates in North America, we have white-tailed deer, mule deer. Well, they breed in November and then drop their antlers right away, December, basically January. Moose breed in October. They drop their antlers as soon as they can, right? Basically in December, January, right? Yeah. And so elk breed in September and drop their antlers in March, April. So of all the North American, in fact, the ungulates in the world, they have this ridiculous thing in their head longer than anybody else, sometimes as long as 6 months. And so we started wondering, well, why? Why is that? And then the Yellowstone Wolf Project is a wonderful long-term research project to work on. It's been 20 years. And every spring and every sort of November and March, they have, researchers, volunteers, interns, students go out and watch one wolf pack every day for 30 days and see what it does. And what he started noticing was that as soon as animals, bull elks, started dropping their antlers, right? So again, in March and April, when a bull elk starts dropping his antlers, right at that moment, they're exceptionally vulnerable to predation. And wolves would preferentially target them and then preferentially kill them compared to the abundance of what we call pedicel bulls, right? So as soon as a bull drops his antler, it's just got this little pedicel there.
Yeah.
And so Matt's kind of field observation, that's really, I love this story because it's one of the reasons why field work's so important, because you get your questions when you spend time in the woods, right? Like, why does this happen? Why did bull elk drop their antlers then? And so, over then the next 5 to 10 years, Matt and the Yellowstone Wolf Project collected data to be able to look at, what's affecting the timing of when bull elk drop their antlers. And what we found was quite surprising. Wolves aren't actually very good predators, right? The only thing they have 2 things going for them. They're earnest. I mean it.
They try very hard.
They try really hard. Think of your lab at home, your Labrador Retriever.
Yeah.
And they're earnest, right? Everybody would agree that labs are earnest animals. So they're earnest and they have friends, right? So they have a pack of wolves and they just try. They keep trying, right? And so what that means is that if and we can look at wolves' teeth. Here's a wolf skull. Like, they're not sharp. They're not going to cut me, right? They just are a blunt weapon. And they, predation by wolves is a pretty ugly thing. And they grab onto the elk, and then they kind of basically make it trip, and then they sort of rip it to bits. It's not very nice. But as a result, though, they end up preferentially killing animals that are weak, injured, or themselves are unlucky. They trip and fall. Yeah. It's not true that wolves only kill the old and the sick and the weak, but they kill the vulnerable. That's true. And so what we found with bull elk then is the opposite. So the bull elk that were dropping their antlers first were in the best body condition, the highest nutritional condition, they were the fattest, they were ready to go. And so by dropping your antlers first, even a couple weeks, what that means, and again, elk are somewhat different from other ungulates, is that they drop their antlers and start growing right away. Whereas a moose who drops its antlers in December waits 3-4 months until the spring and starts growing again. And so if that bull elk in best body condition drops their antlers, they'll start growing earlier. And what we know from other studies is that even if you have a 2-week head start, your antlers will be 2 weeks bigger come August, right? So those individuals then we use the term trade-off, but in an evolutionary sense. They weren't waking up in the morning and saying, oh, what should I do today? Oh, I'll drop my antlers, right? It was more a hormonal trigger based on their fat body condition and their stores. And yet those individuals were facing a trade-off, right? And ultimately, all that matters in life is breeding, whether or not you have babies or not. And so those bulls were like, I'm going to start growing early, even though it might be riskier.
For an elk, not for humans.
Yes.
Other things matter for us.
Yeah. So we think they do.
The elk antler is then definitely being used to help them not get predated.
Right. And so, yes, and there's 2 ways that weapons help, right? One is a weapon actually can help injure or harm somebody who's trying to harm you.
You got this big
right, but the second way is just a deterrent.
Yeah,
right.
You look at that and you're like, no.
Right.
I mean, I look at an elk with a full set of antlers, and I also would not approach.
No, and we catch elk with a variety of means, and I've had an elk trap for many years that can catch 30 or 40 elk in it, and we purposefully try not to catch bull elk because then we have to deal with them.
Yeah.
Right, and we're not interested, at least that part of that study, we weren't interested in collaring bull elk. But getting into a corral trap with some elk with antlers on their heads is the last thing me or even cowboys want to do, and I work with a bunch of cowboys. So,
do you then put them to sleep, or do you?
We just open the gate and let them run away. We honestly don't want to deal with them.
Yeah. So if you catch one, you're like, I'm done.
Exactly.
I don't want to kill a graduate student.
Yep.
So you also have, I want to get to all the things on the table, if we can, because people are going to be curious.
The next one's this, right? So
boring, terrible.
Well,
give up. What is that a...
One of the species I've mentioned that is unique about antlers.
Oh, yeah.
So we've talked about deer. All the ungulates in the world, only males have antlers.
Except
for caribou and reindeer, if you're in Europe. So this is a female caribou shed, and it's probably a 5-6-year-old female caribou antler.
Right.
And so it really, it's sort of I always get this question every Christmas, was Rudolph a boy or a girl, right? Because both male and female caribou have antlers. And what's interesting is that by about Christmas, caribou males, most of them, especially the really big ones, have dropped their antlers. So by inference, like Rudolph wasn't a boy reindeer. He had to probably be a young female reindeer, right? So that's an example of gender discrimination in sort of Christmas legends we tell ourselves. So, but what's interesting about female caribou antlers is they have antlers for very different reasons. And it's reflected almost in the size of these two. This is an adult, mature female caribou antler.
And this is...
Well, and this, that's a bull elk antler. Bull elk are competing with each other for breeding opportunities. Females, there's a couple of hints about what's really cool. Males breed in September and then drop them in March or April. Females drop their antlers right after they give birth. And they don't start growing them until the end of the summer. And then we see another sort of interesting fact about reindeer or caribou antlers is that I've just said female caribou have antlers, but not all female caribou have antlers. And when we get to the barren ground populations, when there's literally 200,000 caribou in a herd, all females have antlers. When we get to small woodland dwelling caribou that live in mountains, like the ones in northern Idaho, the last three, there only about half females have antlers. And so those two pieces of information, both the differential timing of antler drop and the fact that we only see antlers in female caribou when they're at those really, really high densities, tells us it's about food competition. They're trying to keep other female caribou away from their crater where they're digging in the snow during winter, right? So they don't have antlers in the summer. And people have said, well, maybe they use their antlers to protect their calves in June and July. They don't have antlers in June and July.
Yeah.
So that goes that,
They're
there
just
goes that
shoving it,
hypothesis.
like, no, this is my hole.
Yeah, and so literally a caribou, will sit there and shovel through the snow all winter eating lichen.
Yeah.
And so this just kind of keeps, the idea is we think that this keeps a little more space around females, especially when there's 200,000 of them, right? So it's always a fun thing, a little not really appreciated fact about caribou. So another reason they're my favorite ungulate, I guess.
So who is this?
So that is the skull of a gray wolf, Canis lupus. And it's a female wolf that I radiocollared in our long-term study in Banff. And it's one of the very few wolves that died from natural causes that at least we've ever studied in that study.
What counts as natural causes?
Well, I mean, that's a good philosophical question, indeed, right?
Didn't get shot by a
It didn't get
human
shot
being.
or killed by humans.
Okay.
And so really most wolves, especially outside protected areas, but even in Banff National Park, wolves often get run over on highways or railways, or they leave the park. Very few of the parks we have in North America, even Yellowstone, are big enough to have wolves all year round. The wolves always end up leaving the park. And so in places like Yellowstone or in big protected areas, the leading cause of wolf mortality is other wolves. So wolves kill other wolves. When we aren't killing them, they kill each other. And they kill very different wolves than we do, it turns out. But outside protected areas, like in the rest of Montana, it's really human-caused mortality that's usually the leading cause of death. But there are other things like accidents. One of our collared wolves just fell off a cliff trying to kill a goat. So it turns out that's pretty risky business. So she fell to her death, and that was the end of her.
The goat was like, I'm a goat.
Yeah, the goat, probably his heart rate didn't even get up past resting. He was so relaxed about it, right? But we've had other ones get disease, right? They're very vulnerable to canine distemper virus and parvovirus, which are diseases indirectly introduced to places by humans. So diseases can be one. And then in this case, this was the very act of predation itself is risky. Again, I mentioned, you're an earnest black lab with a little bit more weight.
I can do this.
Yeah, a little more weight behind you, sure, but you're trying to kill a bison, right? So that, we actually see a really important cause of mortality for wolves is death during predation attempts, right? You're trying to kill something that weighs 10 times heavier than you. That's a risky business.
Why do it?
Why do it? Yeah.
So is it bison?
So this was a moose, right? The moose killed this female, and the moose, walked away from it and probably was a little stressed out about the whole event, but, it didn't really have much of an effect on her day. So, whereas it definitely had an effect on this. And then the pack gave up and went and tried something else.
Yeah. So you said that wolves kill very different wolves than people do.
Well, right. So in a national park or protected area where there isn't a lot of human-caused mortality, wolf packs, basically the way I view wolf pack dynamics is trying to guard the fridge. If you think about in your house, if you were trying to preserve your food resources, you'd make sure nobody could get onto your property and access your fridge. And so that's what wolves are doing with the territory. They're sort of they're saying, this is my territory, this is my fridge, the elk in here are ours, and you can't have them.
So it's pack to pack.
Exactly.
Fighting.
And then other packs will look at what's in their fridge and say, well, that's a pretty sweet deal. I would like some of that. And they'll often sneak in, or they actually then try to take over other pack territories. And so, for example, if a pack grows, right, and they go from 10 to 16 wolves with pups, they need more food. They need more stuff in their fridge. They might try and take over the territory of a neighboring pack. And so when there are interpack aggression, pack size really determines who wins. But also, so does the composition of the pack. Like, how many adults are there? How many 6-year-olds? And so in fights between packs, it's often that juveniles get killed, but often it's the sort of mature animals that get targeted if there's an opportunity. And wolves preferentially then seem to target other adult wolves, whereas human hunters or trappers, aren't as preferential. That wolf's stepmother lived to the ripe old age of 13, and she never was seen by hunters or trappers. She was in and out of trap lines all the time, and she was basically invulnerable to trapping. Whereas to other wolves, she wouldn't have been invulnerable. So that's what I meant about that, is that, humans tend to kill juvenile teenagers, right? I mean, the sort of least intelligent member of a wolf pack. So,
right.
Or the bravest and the boldest, depending on how you...
being a little bit more of a
Exactly.
dope. As we all are as teenagers.
At least I was.
And so 6 is like prime good age for a strong leader of a pack.
Yeah, so in the wild, wolves basically rarely live past 8, 9, 10 years old. And in hunted populations, it's more like 4 to 5 years old. So there's a few more things to sort of point out here. And the one then is to start, just contrasting wolves with what I consider one of the more, sort of penultimate large carnivores in the world. This is the track of a Amur or Siberian tiger. So Siberian tigers were misnamed. There are no tigers in Siberia. It's too cold and miserable. There's only caribou or reindeer to eat. But people didn't really know where they were when they first went to eastern Russia. And so it's actually the Amur River Basin, which is in the area around Vladivostok, just north of China, and Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And so I've worked there with a guy, Dale McKell, who's Wildlife Conservation Society now on and off for about 8 years studying Amur tigers. And so when we compare, again, the Ernest lab, right, the sort of wolf story, on an average per capita basis, every time they encounter an ungulate, they're successful at killing one about, on average, let's say 20, 25% of the time. They're not very good at it, right? So they just kind of shake off, have a little, have a chew and a bone, and then try again.
Yeah, go a few days without food.
Exactly. Whereas, like, in the large carnivore spectrum, really, the felids, the cats, right, tigers, they're in this category. Tigers are really a much more effective large carnivore. I mean, their attack success per attempt is more like 70, 80%. So they just kind of wake up in the morning and swat whatever they want. And one of the other big differences between felids and canids, right, cats and dogs, is dogs are what we call cursorial predators. They chase, right? And they just try and literally, in some ways, wear the animal down until it sort of is vulnerable and kill it. Whereas a mountain lion, tiger, lions, etc., are ambush predators. They're stalking predators. And again, in human terms, I think of, cats are more like bow hunters, the sit and wait predator, right? And they literally will sit and wait. Whereas wolves are more like a deer hunter who's walking around and trying to just shake stuff out of the woods and see what jumps up. And then our advantage is we have high power rifles. And so we can chase things out to 400 yards if we're really good.
Very quick, very fast.
Exactly.
Fast leg of the chase.
Exactly. It's like cheating compared to a wolf. But mountain lions and tigers are extremely efficient predators, right? And so they're solitary, they don't hunt in packs, and they have much higher attack success, but they're stalkers.
That's a big footprint.
It is, yeah. I can't remember the exact female this belonged to, but the average size of tiger they would catch is about 220 kilograms. And so that's a 500-pound kitty cat, right? Yeah. And then this is sort of highlights the...
how difficult sometimes not be easy to live with?
Yeah, what do you think it is? The bracelet?
Yeah, should I put it on?
Well, what do you think?
Well, how do I open it first?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, that's how. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured that out. It's a puzzle. I'm going to hurt myself. And then I put it here.
Exactly, that's what it is.
And then a wolf cannot eat me.
A wolf would have a hard time killing you, yeah. And so this was given to me by a good colleague of mine who's an Italian wolf biologist, right?
When was this made?
This is contemporaneous.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like this was,
wow.
This was used in the field,
I mean, I'd want one of these if I was going to fight a wolf.
It probably fits in some sort of music scenes,
Sure. Don't get too close.
Right, but this just illustrates that carnivores are great.
This is not for a human. This is for a dog.
Exactly. This is for a Portuguese livestock guardian dog.
Okay.
One of the things about having livestock, they're an ungulate, right? Sheep and cows have traded most of their exceptional skills that the wild ungulates have at escaping predation. We've helped them trade those, so they've just become like a cow, a big, humongous animal that can't run. And so they're actually a little more vulnerable to predation from large carnivores. And in this area of Portugal, for decades, since the 30s, there haven't been any wild ungulate prey. So there's no deer,
so they're just
there's no wild boar.
Livestock.
And so wolves have persisted in this region for literally decades, eating nothing but livestock. I mean, carnivores tell us we have healthy ecosystems. They tell us that we are protecting habitats for other species, like the whole umbrella species concept. But they're kind of a pain to live with. And wherever I've worked around the world, nobody who actually lives in the countryside who has livestock actually is really excited about having large carnivores around.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to have one friend who loses a pregnant goat to a coyote before you're like, oh, I see why that might be frustrating.
It is, yeah. And in this part of the world, we have conservation programs that they're not perfect, but they help compensate ranchers, farmers for losses to livestock.
Yeah.
But when you go to tiger range countries, we don't have anything like that. We have real human rights challenges.
Well, do you want to meet a not super large carnivore?
I'd love to.
All right, let's do it.
Good girl. Hello, pretty one. What do you think?
This is Serafina.
She's a red fox. Have you ever been this close to a red fox before?
I have.
You have?
I have. I've radio collared them.
Awesome.
They're amazing animals.
As close as you can get.
Little collars for these guys.
They do.
Girl. When you were trapping the fox, was it difficult to get them?
Foxes are smarter than most other animals, yeah. So they're very intelligent animals, yeah.
I think their smarts kind of come from their inherent distrust of everything.
Yep, yeah. Balanced with their curiosity. So.
Exactly. So they can't stand not knowing what it is, but it's also terrifying at the same time.
It's probably not a bad mix of things if you're going to be this size.
Oh, I mean, they are incredible survivors. These guys, they're pretty terrible invasive species wherever they're introduced. They can figure out how to find something to eat. They eat such a variety of things. Right now she's getting meat and vegetables and fruit. They'll eat bugs. They'll eat birds. They mostly are solitary, but there's one right there.
I want
She's
meat. Where's the meat
I
piece?
swallowed too much. Did you see her moment of mistake? That was a mistake. So, I mean, they're going to go for high protein things because that's going to last the longest. But they'll eat anything that smells like food. Most of the time they are solitary or with their mate. But they can live up into a little group of up to 5 or 6. It's usually one male and then a bunch of vixens. And usually the vixens are related. So there's not much squabbling there. But yeah, have you ever heard a fox in the wild? Either of you?
I have.
What have you?
Like what a fox says?
Yes.
No.
Have you?
What does the fox
you
say?
said yeah.
Yeah, they have very interesting vocalizations that don't sound like what you think of for a dog.
Yeah, it's like a weird high pitch. It's like if you took a dog noise and cranked up the tone, high pitch. But so some of the things that she's done, she hasn't done any of the calls for her young. She doesn't have any babies, but that they have little calls for that. And then they have danger call. And it's really interesting because they make their mouth into an O shape and it goes, yow, yow. And it's disconcerting. It'd be like that creepy noise you hear in the forest. You're like, that is not
an animal.
That's not an animal that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
But one of the two noises that I hear, well, I guess she does 3 noises that I hear a lot. One is she is housed with an Arctic fox, and so they have a lot of interactions, and she will growl at him when he comes too close to the food.
So just like a dog growl?
Exactly. Sounds exactly like what you think a growl sounds like. But then she does 2 other noises. One is supreme excitement, and it's like this scream thing. And actually, once we put her away, I'll demonstrate the scream thing.
Because you don't want to scare.
Yeah, she'll look at me real
run away.
Yeah, she's like, nope.
Pee on our table.
Nope, I don't like that. Did
it's trying to jump on me.
It's like I need to get closer to that hand that is delivering my food. And then the other thing that she does a lot is something called geckering. She does it with me and also Cass, the other fox, and that is fighting but also play. And so when they are running around, jumping, pounding, just playing around, they'll start geckering with each other, and it's open mouth, and they're both kind of at each other, and they go, ah, 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 ah. And then she'll also do that to me sometimes when we are playing together, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it's over here. I know. So those are the 3 that I hear a lot, which is pretty fun. But they have over 20 different vocalizations. They can also whine. They can howl, and they can do a high-pitched bark. It's not like a yip, like a chihuahua. It's just it's like an ow, wow, ow bark, but it's a little higher pitched than a normal dog bark. All of them are very different, which is why I love that song so much that came out so many years ago, because it came up with such weird noises. I'm like, well, kind of.
Not those precise ones, but definitely
but
lots of different weird noises.
Yeah. So these guys are pretty successful hunters. It's one of the most interesting ways that they hunt is by pouncing on things that they can't see.
I've seen that in the wild before.
Like with your own eyes?
Yeah, pouncing into the snow.
Like, awesome. Head first.
Yeah.
When they use their ears, like as little triangulation tools, like an owl, and you'll see them using it slightly offset to try and figure out exactly where the mouse or vole is.
Yes.
2 or 3 feet underneath the snow.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And they can jump so high and get so far down into the snow. It's impressive.
Right. You know, foxes are one of the most widespread, we call them mesocarnivores, right? They're kind of middle-sized.
Yeah.
And they occur through Russia, India, all the way through Eurasia, North America, even in northern Mexico. And we tend to think of it as this coloration. Sorry, buddy, it's a little hasty, right? But if you really look at the haunches of this Seraphina here, you can see like a little coloration that isn't strictly classically red.
Yeah.
So there's actually 2 other color varieties of foxes in North America, the cross fox and then a silver fox. And the cross fox is called cross because it tends to have a black dorsal mark on its spine and then black across its shoulders so that it looks kind of like a cross from above. And they're a really rare color variant, but they're actually locally abundant here in the Big Hole of Montana and on the Idaho-Montana border. So I've seen a lot of cross foxes here in Montana, and we don't know exactly what makes them black, right? Because they're red almost everywhere else in the world, and so they're sort of a puzzle yeah, it's very much like the black coat color gene of wolves, we think, actually. But nobody really knows now. So,
and then the silver fox, that they were kind of made popular by the Russian breeding for the experimentation on domestication of foxes.
Right.
And then silver fox is the same species as the red fox, it's just a different color. Yeah, but that's a really interesting study that they're doing to see how close we can come to domesticating these guys.
Right, and what changes.
Exactly.
What are the, which we've talked about here on SciShow Talk Show
We
before.
have, yeah.
The genetic changes that lead to domestication of different animals.
I am out of food. She's going to be done very soon.
Okay. Well,
now that she has no focus.
It's very hard for me not to reach out and
Just
pet a
touch her.
dog. Yeah.
She will most likely run away, and then as she's running away, nip your hand.
Okay, well, I won't do
Don't
it
do
then.
that. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Well,
She
you've been
seems
very
great
cooperative.
and wonderful.
You've been
but
wonderful.
she's 7.5 years old. She's been doing. Oh, don't bite him though.
Okay, thanks.
That was a very good. That was a sweet little.
Nice little
do you
sniff.
have food?
Yeah, I don't. That's empty.
And I'm gonna go ahead and pick her up now.
Okay.
I'm gonna go put her back, and then I'm gonna come scream for you guys.
Okay.
Yay. We several times in my life I've found a den where the mother and the parents are out hunting for the day, and then there's a little bunch of fox kits, right? And they're hard not to just sit and watch them all day. And then the kits are usually not incredibly wary. And so you actually can't get very close to them. Yeah. Just saying, I've had a lot of fun watching kits at dens before.
Oh my god!
Even on the edge of Missoula here.
So much fun.
Yep.
Yeah. They just play so hard, and it's just they can't hurt themselves. They're just roly-poly little fluffy bundles of tiny teeth.
So what do they sound like?
You gonna do it?
Okay. It's a little embarrassing, but I'll do it. All right. So when she gets super excited, it's usually like when I'm coming with Cass, he's been to a show, and I come back and she's like so excited about Cass, or like she knows I have something good to eat or a toy. She will run in and see me and go, and then she does it for like 5 to 10 minutes. Constant. As she runs around.
Must be very flattering.
Yeah.
That kind
It's
of...
very exciting. I'm like, yeah, I'm excited. I can feel it.
Yeah, let's only do this in the daytime.
Oh, and she does it at night sometimes.
Because the neighbors.
Sometimes she gets very excited about things at night, and we hear the screaming, and we're
Yeah.
like, well, something good happened.
just a rabbit found its way into the enclosure.
I smelled something good, or I don't
Yeah.
know, she found a cache of something that she had
Just a really good stick.
Right. Yeah, so that's one thing. That's one thing to say.
That sounds like an accurate representation. I feel like I could hear a fox making that noise.
Yeah, and then they do all that like up and down crackling, and up. It's just it's pretty cool. It's fun.
Yeah,
It's
no,
fun
they're amazing.
to see her that excited.
Well, I'm glad you could bring us a canid carnivore.
Oh, and I love that you said carnivore because that's wrong.
Oh, well,
You were close.
Omnivore.
Half close,
Yeah.
halfway there. Yeah, she's an omnivore. And so that's, I mean,
we'll do whatever.
and aren't technically wolves omnivores as well?
Well, it's interesting, actually. There is a big difference between wolves and smaller canids like coyotes and foxes. And we actually technically call them all carnivores, but you're right that foxes are an omnivore. They eat berries, and they also eat berries in their scat. But canids, like coyotes and foxes, have actually had a mutation for the digestion of amylase. So they can actually digest starch from vegetables, whereas wolves cannot.
Okay.
And human dogs also have that. So that's one of the signs of coevolution between domestic dogs and humans, is that domestic dogs have evolved to eat our garbage.
Yeah.
Right? And so now foxes have always had that, and so did coyotes. So coyotes can digest things like starches and vegetables, carrots, stuff like that. But wolves can't. They often eat grasses, but it's thought to be more of kind of like a
Digestive aid.
digestive aid, exactly, to
Yeah.
scrape, basically to scrape intestinal worms off of their GI tract, which is charming post-lunch, sort of dinner conversation.
Well, what we see more and more of is these hard lines that we draw are pretty fuzzy.
They're not. They're
Like,
out. There's.
then we had a study recently that deer sometimes eat baby birds.
Oh, absolutely. And mice.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, we try and put things in a box, and
Yeah,
nature doesn't let us.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks,
My
Jesse.
pleasure. Thank you.
This is
Thanks
really
for letting me
fascinating.
meet Serafina. She was a beautiful fox.
Ah, thank
Yeah.
you.
If you want to see more of what Jesse's up to, she has a YouTube channel talking about her work with her wildlife rescue sanctuary place.
Sure.
YouTube.com/AnimalWondersMontana. And Mark, where can we find out more about what you do?
Google Heb Lab, University of Montana, and you'll find out about what me and my graduate students are up to. So,
Right. And thank you for hanging out and watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you want to subscribe, you'll get more great science stuff in your subscriptions box, and you can do that at youtube.com/SciShow.